Hello, career thought leaders. Good to see you here again today. And today we are talking about an important topic, which is resume gaps. So this is something that gets us all, right? At some point, we all have a gap. So why is it such a big deal? It seems like if everyone has gaps, why do employers care? And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about why the gaps matter and a little tiny bit of research that we have that shows what types of gaps matter and those types of things. And then we'll look at some samples of resumes with gaps or that could have gaps and how we filled those gaps. So feel free to say hello, love to see who's here, and also share any questions or specific client challenges or maybe some solutions that you've used to help clients deal with resume gaps. And this came up because today I gave a presentation for a group in Singapore, and we were talking about the resume as a coaching tool and how when we're writing a resume with someone, we're really helping them work through their work history, how they're going to put it together, how they're going to connect it to the employer's needs, and how they are going to interview. So this is a challenge that people need to be able to talk about as well as figure out how they want to handle on their resume. So I'm glad to see you all here. Please say hello and let me know what types of resume gaps you're dealing with. So the first thing we'll do, hi Elizabeth, hi Murray, good to see you. Thank you for coming. The first thing that we'll talk about is this data. So this is a small data point, and perhaps it's somewhat dangerous because it backs up what we know. It also backs up what we see. So, we'll see what you think. You can tell me what you think. So this is a little bit of data from an organization called Resume Go. And when we look at these types of articles, it's always important to kind of look at what did they do and who are they looking at. So they were looking at a field experiment, 36,000 openings, and job boards were applied to using fictitious applicants. So it's pretty good research. 36,000 openings is pretty good, right? And here's what they found. So when people had gaps, the longer the gap, the less of a chance they had of getting a callback. Now it's important that we look at our numbers here. 11.3% of getting a callback when you have nothing wrong, let's say. Nothing wrong with your resume. Of course, we don't know, how good with the resume is and those types of things, but it makes it comparable, because if they were sending ones with 0 years of a gap and then, more, we can see, okay, that's probably what they were doing. And let me see if I can, it doesn't look like I can zoom in easily. So you can always come back. I'll grab this link and put it in the chat here in a second. So if we come down here, then it talks about how the largest, callbacks is when you have more than 2 years of a gap. And then if you provided reason for the gap, you had 60% more interviews. But it's still low. I mean, we're talking about a jump from 4% to 6%, or 4% to 8% if they filled that with education. So it gives us some ideas of what things we might use to fill the gap, if you will. So raising a family, if they filled the gap that way, it's closer to 6%. And these ones, family, and then in that education piece, they had a much higher rate, comparing that 8.5 again to this 11.3 that people had if they didn't have any gap. So yes, it's better if you fill the gap, but it's still not great, which is why we talk about interviewing. But let's look at some ways today that we can fill this gap. So any thoughts or questions on this research before we move on? I'd encourage you to come and look at it. Here, let me post this into the comments for you. So a little bit of research that shows those gaps do hurt our clients. You've heard some hopeful things that maybe since it's COVID, people won't be punishing our clients for gaps. I tend to think the human psyche is fairly consistent, and when it was 2008, people struggled because of gaps, even though it was the largest recession at that point in people's lives. And I don't see that we're going to have this golden halo because of COVID. You might have it for a little bit longer, but as soon as whoever your hiring manager is feels like things are back to normal, even if they aren't, they're going to start thinking the same way they've always thought. And maybe not, maybe it'll surprise me, but I think that our clients are still going to face some of these challenges. Now, my hope is that you can share this with your clients and write your own articles about it, do your own videos about it. Let's talk, let's fill the airwaves for our clients about do something about this now. You're at home, you're homeschooling kids. I understand these challenges. And what could we do in the wee hours of the night or the wee hours of the morning, or when we can trade off with our spouse, significant other, whoever we can get to help us, so that we might be able to spend 1 hour a week working on a class, so that when COVID is over and there's more positions available or whatever might be going on for our clients, they have something to fill that gap, because we know how important filling that gap is. Should it be? I don't know, but I don't like to live in shoulds. I like to live in is, and it is important. It is going to impact them. So how can we help them right now find something they could do right now? Small, right? It doesn't have to be huge. We don't have to tell how many hours a week they were working on their class or volunteering or whatever it might be. But if we can help them find something now to fill the gap, it will be much easier when they go to start job searching. How can they do that? And right here we see that education is, pretty valid reason. Almost gets you all the way back up to where it was without a gap, right? So that's an awesome opportunity. And Linda, yeah, so many free and low cost options. And so many of those even have like suggested course projects. So if someone's going to take a Coursera class, a lot of times there's a project that they can do that gives them that opportunity to talk about how they use the skills, or maybe even have a work product to show that's not related to a company. So there's no, confidentiality issues, and they could show that work product based on that course that they just took. Gig work, consulting projects, volunteer assignments. You want to keep it relevant, right? Whatever you can do to use and be able to talk about those relevant skills, but how can we help them now figure out that this is important and that it's not just going to go away? And I think in some ways the talk about, oh, it's COVID, everyone understands, gives us a little bit of false sense of security, because if that's not true, it's going to hurt them. And so how can we help them do whatever they can do to find a way to fill that gap now? That's my sales pitch right there, right? How can we help them fill the gap now? Because it is going to be important. So again, here's the link for this research by Resume Go. Thank you for them to do that, and at least a little bit of data to help us share with our clients that these gaps do matter. All right, so let's look at some ways that we might fill the gaps. And the examples that I have for you today, I'm just realizing I don't have an education example, but we can find one and pull one up if we get there. So let's do this and we'll share some examples. So this is from a session that we did a few years ago on resume gaps. And so some of the dates you'll see are a couple years old because I didn't update the dates. But this is someone who had a kind of a here and there background, right? And they were a contract worker. And one of the questions that I got asked this morning was specifically about contract workers. So I thought, okay, let's bring this one up. It is a different example, maybe not your typical contractor, but same idea. So this person was a firefighter or paramedic, and they worked for the Air Force, air bases as a civilian. So we could do this with many different types of project work, where we start with the title up here, and we've got the title as paramedic, and then the dates cover the date range that the person worked at all of these air bases. So if we had someone who was doing finance or even marketing, contracting, any different type of contracting, we give them a title, and then we list the organizations that they were at. And this works as long as there wasn't huge gaps. I think even if you had a couple of months here or there, you could get away with doing this, where you list the places, put that date range as the overarching date range, and then talk about what they did there. And sometimes each bullet might be a specific project or a specific organization, depending on the type of client. Love to do this with technology clients and, kind of put together those organizations that might have been contracting for. And then each bullet is a project or an organization that they worked for. So it can cover some little gaps. It also covers that kind of job hoppiness. Now, interesting. So I heard this from a recruiter. I actually think Shelly Steckrell said this when he was doing his session for us this summer, that job hopping is considered by recruiters when someone has jobs that are less than 2 years and multiple. So it's a pattern. So if someone had a short job right before COVID ended, and then they had a long job before that one, they're not a job hopper. We're okay, fill out that longer job, make a little shorter stint for the short job, and then a short stint for their current consulting. We don't necessarily need to get overly creative for that person, because if they don't have a pattern, it's not going to be looked at as that job hopper. So this is not necessarily filling huge gaps, but if there are small gaps, we can still kind of round that out by grouping them together, similar job title, and then the years. Now, of course, you might not be able to do this on an application, depending on how the application works. Sometimes you can, if you can get the organizations, in the organization field and they were all in the same place and all those things. But when we're doing a resume, we can build this cohesive picture for the individual, and it helps them as they move forward to be able to show that cohesive picture. So that is what Marcia did for herself, and it worked perfectly. Excellent. So it helps our clients just do that, move forward, and see what they're able to do. All right. So our next one here is an individual who was out of work, actually at the current time, but it had been a handyman and been a groundskeeper. Now, the thing is that this is his own handyman company, right? And sometimes we can work with clients to be able to do this, to create some kind of consulting to fill the gap. And Marie, I know you talk about doing this on your LinkedIn profiles, especially, where we can fill the gap and be able to help someone with that consulting. It has to be real, right? They have to be doing some consulting, but it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be a full-time job. It can be for family or friends, as long as it's real and they're adding value and using the skills they want to use, right? So we can show those projects in a way that it really speaks to what they want to do. So we had his kind of consulting, and he'd been doing that on and off the whole time. So we dated it back to 2013. Then he'd worked for a private homeowner. And then this one was someone who was older, in their 60s, and they'd managed a farm before that. Now, we wanted to put this on there because it showed that working for a corporate, right? Working for an organization, and they wanted to go and work for a healthcare organization as a handyman maintenance person. So they wanted to show that, hey, I've worked for a company, not just private organizations and myself. And this individual got a job at the local long-term care facility as a maintenance worker, and it was perfect because we were able to put together, fill the gap. And again, if you joined us late, these dates are old because I didn't go in and update the dates. So it was maybe a 2 or 3 year gap at that point because they'd gotten hurt and, all of those things that happen. But instead of putting, health care or I was hurt or injured, we just put in the things that are relevant. And everybody's situation is different. We're going to have to talk to every client about their situation, but that's usually my last resort. At-home parent or, some kind of healthcare challenge is my last resort. I'd rather fill that gap with anything relevant, active, using the skills, showing they're using the skills. And so since he had done this on and off, we put it down, put in the relevant things. It's not long, right? It's short, but it shows that, hey, I've been using my skills recently, and I've been doing this. I've been active. And then again, this back here, and this was a more well-known organization in the community. We have to make everything anonymous, but part of this too was showing that they'd worked for a larger organization, an organization that other people in the community knew that would help them make that connection. So sometimes we go back, maybe even old experience, to show some of the skills or experience that we need to show. And I didn't put all of the years because he went back to 1970. So he had worked as the manager of that farm for 30 years. And we didn't want to have people be able to calculate all of that on paper. So we just said sold in 2013, and instead of putting his start and end dates. So any questions? Let me see, we got a comment there. So Elizabeth had an event planner, major hotel chain. Yeah, completed this project management course and immediately landed a position. Yeah, that retool, being able to put that course on there can really be helpful. All right, let's look at one more of our examples here. So this one actually, I guess, was someone who went back to school. So this was a nurse that had been a stay-at-home mom and gone back to school to freshen up before getting back into the job search. So required for her field, right? You can't just go back into nursing. But as you're saying, Elizabeth, oftentimes this is something that we can put in. So she filled the gap with experience intern. One of the things that I talk to our Resume Writing Academy students frequently, and we have a lot of assignments that kind of bait them into doing this. Let's not lead with the word intern, practicum. We don't need that word as the lead. Sometimes we may not even feel like we need that word at all. If someone was a marketing intern, can we put that, they were a marketing assistant? We might have to put intern, but sometimes we don't need that even though we think we do. Or people put like student intern. Well, we don't need that, right? And volunteer is the same thing. I don't ever use the title volunteer on someone's resume unless it's actually in the volunteer section. If I'm using it to fill a gap in their resume, they're not a volunteer, right? They're a worker. Sure, they weren't getting paid, but that is not what we're saying here. We're saying experience, related experience, whatever it might be. If you say professional experience, that may be seen as somewhat misleading, but it's experience, right? So registered nurse intern. And then she's got her information about what she was doing there. So it very well kind of fills this gap of current, what am I doing? And then that at-home parent, but I have sports first aid consultants because of course, every client I work with, we dig for what was going on during that time that is relevant to your current goal. And almost everybody I've worked with has something relevant to fill that gap. It's just our lovely process of digging for it, right? That's why we do what we do. We love it. And we help people draw connections and do things that they don't think about themselves. But she had two boys, two boys who played hockey during that time. And she was the first aid person. And that's a big deal, right? I don't know if any of you are hockey fans, but it's a constant bloodbath, right? So this was something that she did. And we filled this gap with that information. And then we had her medical center history back here. Again, this went back to the 80s, so I didn't put in the years. There's pros and cons there. You could decide to put in the dates. We talked about her doing a lot of networking. And then if she was going to apply online, she was going to put the dates in there because of course the dates were needed when she was applying online. And we had talked about how to balance all of that. But she had this ability to build a resume and show that she'd had that work experience, even though she hadn't been doing that for a while. So these, again, are a few of the examples from our Writing Challenging Situations e-summit a few years ago. So if you have someone that's gone back to school, make that look like a job, right? You can put student, but the name, so marketing and communication student or project management student, right? Depending on what they're doing. And if you can put in some projects and make it look like a job, it fills that gap, but in a way that looks very relevant and current. And we might not even notice that it's a gap because it looks like a job and it reads like a job. And that's really my goal with every client, is that as much as possible, the entries on their resume look like a job, read like a job. All right, let's look at this last one real quick here. So this was one of my favorite clients because she was at a nonprofit I was working with. She was coming back to get technology skills training, and she had been all over the place. I think I might have shown this example before, but it's one of my favorite. So she was a recreation assistant, was what she decided was one of the things she might do. But she had been a hairstylist, a massage person, she had bounced around so much in this last 15 years. Well, it was like, I don't know, 13 years at the time she and I worked together. And we just put it all together as much as we could. It was all somewhat related, right? Customer service, massage, hairstyling, all people, person stuff. And so putting it together and making it as relevant to what a recreation assistant and a long-term care facility might do. They often do hairstyling and fingernail painting and all of those things. So it was a good fit for her in some of those ways. And acupuncture, acupressure, right? She could teach a class on Reiki. There's lots of fun things in here that she could bring to that. Then she'd also sold cattle. I always look at this one and think, oh, we probably could have taken cattle out of this a little bit more, but product promotion and how can we translate that into the language of something similar to what she might be wanting to do. And then this customer service at the hospital, important because she was going to be at long-term care facilities. But all of this was very hoppy, and we just do what we can to massage it into things that make sense and kind of hide the gaps, because she might have been at one salon for 2 years and then another salon for 3 years, but we didn't need to show all those details. She was a massage therapist, she did mobile hair, and we could put those pieces together. One of the reasons we left this older experience on was because she had been the head trainer. So she'd actually done training, scheduling, and those were important skills for the jobs that she was looking for. So there are a lot of creative ways that we can fill the gaps. And what I was talking this morning and gave a presentation this morning, and one of the suggestions that kind of came out of nowhere, I was giving the presentation at 5 a.m. this morning, so it came out of nowhere, was the idea that one of the challenges we might face when we're talking to someone about their gaps is that we start there. And when we start there, we're in kind of a bad place. How are we going to fix this problem? How are we going to make this relevant? And what I would recommend, if we're starting with a client who's feeling, I have this gap, I'm not confident, what am I going to do about it? That we start with their wins. Let's start back with the times that they felt really successful. What are some of their best accomplishments? When were they doing something that was really relevant and powerful and they love to do? And if we start there, a few things happen. One, they start to build their confidence. They're telling us their stories. They're really engaged and they're excited about what they've done. And so they start to get that confidence back. Two, they start to get it. So when I'm working with someone on their resume, I'm really targeted. So when have you done that? When have you used that skill? When have you done this? When have you used this skill? And they start to get that flow of, oh, these are the skills that I'm going to talk about. These are the stories that are really important. So then when we get to the gap, they're already in creative problem solving mode and connect the dots mode. And it's a more creative, more, I just feel like it's easier when we do it that way versus they kind of want to start with the gap. Well, what are we going to do about the fact that I don't have a job right now? Well, let's set that down and let's talk about what you want to do. What do these people that you're applying to really care about? What's their needs? What's their challenges? And then what shows that you can address those challenges? What from your background, what stories show that you add value? And once we start there, then it's going to be a lot easier to talk about that gap, and we're going to have more creativity and energy and confidence around it than if we start with that gap when we first connect with them. So that would be one of my thoughts to you on that. So someone lost their job due to COVID, studying IT, added his project under experience. Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Betsy. And then Emily, great point about not listing volunteer. Yeah, volunteer, student, intern, any of those things that we can either minimize or not include if we don't really have to. I know volunteer is seen as a benefit, but that's when it's extra. When we're trying to use it to fill a gap or to show experience, I think volunteer is still seen as not enough, not as much, not experience, right? So we want to be careful not to minimize that for our clients. We had someone who was pre-C, but we could translate the event management to virtual event management. Yeah, that transition. Excellent. Thank you for sharing, Emily. And then how would we address a resume if client took off to be a caretaker and that's truly all they had time to do during that break? Yeah, so if they were taking off for a caretaker, some of it depends on how long ago it was. So if it's not their current job, if it's not their current thing, it can be a one-liner, or we may even not worry about it. So here's the thing that kind of rocked my whole world. I was in the like, you've got to fill the gap world, right? Got to fill the gap, got to fill the gap. And then I had a client who came in and had a gap that was 4 or 5 years ago. It was a 2-year gap, but it was older. And I said, well, what's going on with this gap? You know, what do people say about this gap? And he said, oh, I've never been asked about it. And what I realized is because he had a chronological resume, you know, a summary and then a chronological resume, is that that gap was kind of hidden, right? The years are separated by the data. And actually that year break was on a page break for him too, which was brilliant. I don't think he did it on purpose, but it was brilliant. So if a gap is further back, we may not need to address it. It's usually this current gap that is a problem. So if you have someone who is currently a caregiver, let's talk about what of those pieces may be relevant. How long is the gap? And is there anything we can do? I mean, I know that's all we have time for. Is there anything that we could make time for? An hour a week to do a class, an hour a week to do something that we can use to fill that gap if the caretaker role is not relevant to what we want to do. And sometimes I help people figure out that maybe they need to do something that's relevant to that. So I've got another example resume that I use a lot for a mom who had left an engineering job and stayed at home with her kids for 15 years. And when she came to me, the first thing she said is, oh, I want to get back to engineering. And I said, well, what have you been doing lately in engineering? And she said, well, I haven't. Okay, so tell me what you have been doing. I didn't argue with her, right? I just said, tell me what you have been doing. And she went on and on about the Boy Scouts and this scholarship she's created and the nonprofit work she was doing. And I said, oh, wow, it sounds you're so passionate about this. And she said, yes, you're right, I am. I was like, well, let's apply for some nonprofit roles, right? Nonprofit coordinator, nonprofit program coordinator. She'd been a volunteer coordinator for the Boy Scouts. And so helping her see that she had all of these applicable skills towards what she wanted to do, but she just thought she needed to go back to engineering because that's what her career had been. And once we wrote her resume, she saw that her career was actually in nonprofit, volunteer management, event management, very clearly and very powerfully. So it depends on how long that gap is, how critical those skills might be to their role. We can also just use that one-liner, right? Family medical care, elderly parent care. If you want to just leave that, and you can, then you move on to the jobs that are more important and you save the space on the page and you really sell that client's experience that is relevant. Yeah. How would we address a client who's insisting they can do anything really well and is reluctant to focus on a target? So this may not work for everyone, but when I had clients who'd come in and they'd say, oh, Marie, I can do anything. I'd say, oh, that's great. I've got a friend who works at the local meat packing plant and a job on the slaughter floor is super easy to get. Let me give her a call and we'll get you a job starting tomorrow on the slaughter floor. And they'd always go, oh, Marie, that's not what I meant. Well, you said anything, right? So what does anything really mean to you? And if I'm going through the career process with them, or even if I'm not, if they say that, I might do a few different things. So you could pull up something like JobScan, or what's the other one, do it free. I wouldn't pay for anything, but just do a free thing to show them how lacking of a match their resume is to one of the jobs that they're applying to. And they'll see really quickly that they've got to target every resume to be able to make it through. And so if you're going to apply to 10 different types of jobs and target your resume every single time, it's going to waste a lot of your time. So instead of wasting your time targeting resumes, why don't we get focused? And that's how I sold a lot of career coaching when I first started, because people would come in for the resume and they'd say that I won't do anything. And I'd say, okay, let's look at your resume compared to these jobs. And you are always going to be doing that. You're going to be spending a lot of time doing that unless we get focused. And then we can talk about what roles, what industries, and how do we help someone get that focus quickly, because they might not want to start over, and that's fine, especially if they have a PhD. But if we don't have a focus, they're going to spend tons of time targeting their resume every time, or they're not ever going to hear back from people. Yeah, focus on the positives. Yep, good. Focusing on the gaps won't boost your confidence. An accountant who is a family caregiver started a nonprofit. Yeah, definitely a value add. So we can always find those gems of things that people did during that time that are relevant. And if we can't find them, then we might just stick to that one-liner. Really depends on what's relevant to that person's job search. And then some companies flag people who apply for multiple unrelated roles. That's a good story to share with your client, Rhonda, that people who are open to anything don't appeal. And there might be other ways that we could explain that to someone. One of the ways that we used to, that I learned from, I think it was Rich Feller or Jackie Pala-Schuster, one of my mentors in the career development field, and she would stand about 10 feet away and throw cards at a hat. And when you stand 10 feet away and throw cards at a hat, guess what? Nothing lands in the hat. But when you walk up to the hat and put the card in the hat, it goes in, right? Woohoo, surprise. And that's what focus is for our clients, that they can either stand back 10 feet away and chuck cards everywhere and they might get lucky, or they can get focused, walk up and put the card in the hat. Could also do it with refrigerator magnets. Have to think of a virtual friendly way to make that analogy. But the idea is that when you're focused, you're connecting. And when you're not focused, you're land blasting. And land blasting takes so much more of your energy. Yeah. Well, that was fun. Let me know if there's other resume challenges that we can cover between our ACRW community. We can usually find a sample that relates to something. I know that Cheryl Minnick was looking for some educator examples, so maybe we'll cover that in one of these sessions sometime as well. And of course, we've got new career trends to talk about since we had our career jam the week before Thanksgiving here in the US. So let me know what you want to talk about, and we will see you next Tuesday.